Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this live event focusing on support for young carers. It's a pleasure to welcome you as we broadcast live across the RPS digital channels on YouTube, LinkedIn, and Facebook. My name is Jonathan Lloyd-Jones, and I'm the Policy and Engagement Lead at the RPS in Wales. And I'm joined today by Lily Spires from the Carers Trust Wales, who will be taking us through a presentation about the new Young Carers ID scheme, which has been introduced in Wales. A big welcome to Lily, and thank you for being here with us today. Before I hand you over to Lily, I just want to say a few words about the importance of recognising and supporting young carers. As a current and proud community pharmacist by background, I appreciate that pharmacies are in a unique position to recognise and support young carers of all ages. At the heart of the community, pharmacy teams often develop supportive relationships with regular customers, and these relationships must never be underestimated. For many, they provide a real lifeline, offering support and providing confidence in the administration of medicines, whether for themselves or for the people they care for. Recognising a young carer and building a solid relationship with them is vitally important for pharmacy teams. Whilst working with the Carers Trust in Wales, I've been disappointed to hear that so many young carers feel undervalued and invisible in the health services that they interact with. This is concerning, and we will hear from Lily about how young carers feel they need to be taken more seriously and need validation for their caring role. As pharmacists and a part of the pharmacy team, we have the opportunity to make changes, no matter how small, which can support young carers to help those they care for to get the most from their medication. I'm delighted that Lily of the Carers Trust has agreed to talk to us today about the Young Carers ID card. We've been working with Lily and the team at Carers Trust for some time, and I'm always blown away by the passion and enthusiasm amongst your team at the Carers Trust, Lily. So we're looking forward to continuing our work, supporting your work amongst the teams. So Lily's going to take us through a presentation around 25 minutes, and then we'll have a few minutes for any questions before closing the session. So please feel free to put any questions forward via the chat functions as we go through the session. And without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to Lily.
Hi, everyone. Oh, excuse me, my throat's gone. Hi, everyone. My name's Lily. I'm a project officer with Carers Trust Wales, and it's a pleasure to be presenting to you our training session on the Young Carers ID card and supporting young carers across the UK. So I'll just share my screen with you. So hopefully you'll be able to see my presentation shortly. Here we go. So thank you everyone for joining and taking part in this online training session for pharmacists and those working in pharmacy settings. We'll be talking about the Young Carers ID card scheme in Wales, its launch, how it can be used, and the ways that you can support the delivery of some of the card's key features, as well as how to support young carers across the UK, even if you don't have access to the Ycid. As you know, I'm a project officer with Carers Trust Wales, and we're committed to improving support and services for unpaid carers. So before we get started, it's important to note that whilst a lot of the session today will be relevant to everyone, some elements are specific to Wales, in particular the sections around the Young Carers ID card, as well as anything relating to the Social Care and Wellbeing Wales Act of 2014. But if you're not based in Wales, please do stick around. There's lots of helpful tips included to support you to support young carers. So first, a bit about us as a charity. Carers Trust Wales is part of Carers Trust, an ambitious national charity committed to improving support and services for unpaid carers by recognising and celebrating the essential contributions carers make, raising awareness of the barriers faced by carers of all ages, and working with decision makers to ensure that appropriate support is available to empower carers to live happy and fulfilling lives. One of our most recent projects has been the development of a Wales-wide Young Carers ID card. So here's a little look at the Ycid. Here's an example card for you from one of our local authorities in Wales, Ceredigion. So the Young Carers ID card, or Ycid as you may hear me refer to it as, is a photo ID card for young carers in Wales. Local authorities may alter the design of the card slightly, but every card will have a few key features that yourselves as pharmacists or people working in pharmacy settings can look out for if someone presents you with a card. So these include a photo of the young carer, an expiration date, the Carers Trust Wales logo and our number, the local authority logo and their number, and most importantly, the young carer's blue cloud logo, which you can see on the top left. This is the easiest way to identify a young carer's ID card. Whilst the young carer's ID card has been designed with the hope of making it easier for professionals to identify and aid young carers, if a young carer approaches and identifies themselves to you, but is not carrying a YCID, you should still aim to help them wherever possible. It can be very difficult for young carers to admit that they are caring for someone or that they need help. It's very important that we don't use the YCID to discriminate against those who may not be carrying one. It's also important to note that in some areas of Wales, the ID card is being supplemented with wristbands or even mobile apps. Whatever the young person shows you, you can be sure that it's affiliated with us by looking for the blue cloud logo. So why did young carers want a young carer's ID card? When we asked young carers how they would like to be supported, many said that an ID card that they can show to people they are seeking help from would be very beneficial. As we have mentioned, it can be very difficult for young carers to identify themselves as such when seeking help or advice. The YCID is intended to reduce stigma and ease the process of identification. With the YCID, young carers will no longer have to go into personal levels of detail when discussing their status and can have confidence in asking for the help that they need. Navigating life whilst you have increased responsibility but are still a legal minor can be very tough, as people often underestimate your responsibility or simply not believe you. When it comes to healthcare and pharmacy work, this can present significant challenges to young carers as they try to book appointments, have their expertise considered, and pick up prescriptions for the person that they care for. The YCID is also an opportunity for young carers who have not yet had a carer's needs assessment to be identified as a young carer. The YCID should not require young carers aged 14 or over to have their parents' permission or any formal assessment, meaning that you can signpost to it even if the parent does not believe their child is a young carer. Some areas in Wales are also piloting an app alongside the physical ID card. So be aware you may see the YCID in a digital form. The app has also other great features to help young carers, including a Ping My School function, which allows the young carers to let the school know they're running late or that their caring duties are affecting their education. We've also developed several resources for professionals to support the launches of the YCID, including a guide for pharmacists and pharmacy staff. I'm just going to show you a quick animation that will tell you all about how the YCID can be used in a pharmacy setting. So I hope you enjoyed that animation. For some pharmacists, it might be strange to see a child or young person picking up prescriptions for the person they care for. As you already know, the most important thing is to establish a relationship between yourselves and the person who visits your pharmacy. If a young carer is using your pharmacy service for the first time, they might not be aware of some of the procedures that may be common practice for you. For example, the person they care for may not have called ahead to let you know that their young carer will be picking up their medication for them. If you come into contact with a young carer you have not met or assisted before, try your best to accommodate their requests. Ask if you're able to speak to the person they care for over the phone, or see if they're carrying the young carer's ID card. With more controlled medications, you may wish to ask for some photo ID from the person picking up the prescription. We would encourage you to use the Ycid as a form of photo ID in these instances wherever possible. In cases where the medicine is not controlled, we would encourage you to use the card as a form of proof that they are collecting the prescription for the person they care for. However, not every young carer will carry a young carer's ID card, so it's important to remember the other steps you can take to confirm identity, such as calling the person the medication is prescribed to. If you identify a carer or a person who is cared for, you can make a note of it in their patient medication record, so yourself and your colleagues all have the same understanding of what is needed. You might also want to consider including young carers in conversations about medication with the person they care for, and tell them how to give and store medications safely. Of course, not every nation in the UK has an ID card scheme for young carers. There are, however, other forms of support and advice that you can signpost to, as well as procedures you can put in place to help young carers wherever you're based. One such procedure is offering to list the young carer as such on the person they care for's patient record. By doing so, you can ensure that the young carer will always be allowed to pick up prescriptions for the person they care for. One challenge a lot of young carers face is being undermined about their caring role when communicating with health and pharmacy professionals, so this will help the young carer to be validated in their role amongst your colleagues. Another step you can take to support young carers is to support efforts to identify young carers. You can contact us at Carers Trust or Carers Trust Wales or your local carers service and receive promotional materials such as posters and leaflets which you can display in branch. You can also appoint a carers lead or a carers champion who is a member of your staff that takes responsibility for making sure your pharmacy is constantly carer aware and that your policies and procedures recognise and support the unique challenges facing young carers. Many young carers don't recognise themselves as such. They're just doing what they do on any given day. That's why it's so important to promote the concept of young carers at points of contact. This will allow them to identify themselves as such and makes them more likely to seek advice or support. So here's a little bit about having a good conversation with a young carer. What does that actually look like? We've spoken to young carers and they gave us their views on that. Well, sorry if you had any audio issues with that video. Unfortunately, I'm new to this streaming platform, but hopefully you got a good idea of what a good conversation with a young carer can look like. Young carers often report to us that they feel misunderstood or underestimated in their caring role. They're often left out of important conversations with professionals about the cared for person's health and well-being. You might need to talk to young carers about things such as store and collect medications. You can offer in-person they care for, disposing of unwanted or out-of-date medicine, or blood pressure, cholesterol, or blood sugar testing if it's something that they care for condition. It's important to know how to, as it can affect their ability to care for their loved one. Think about the kind of language you use with young people. It's important to be as clear as possible, but without talking down to them or underestimating what they might already know. So, for example, instead of diving right into explaining how to give and store medication, you can ask them if they're responsible for giving and storing the medication themselves and whether they already understand how to do so safely. So, for the next few minutes, I'll just be going through some example scenarios of young carers entering a pharmacy seeking different types of advice and support. So I'll read through the scenario and then I'll talk through one of the ways you could approach the scenario in a positive and supportive way. So first is, a young carer wants to collect a controlled prescription for his mum. He has a signed prescription form and a Ycid, but otherwise no photo ID, and they have not collected controlled medication for someone else before. So in this scenario, we would encourage you to follow your normal procedure for controlled medication and ask for a form of ID. We would encourage you to use the Ycid as a form of photo ID if procedure allows. Alternatively, if you're not based in Wales, you could use any kind of ID that is outlined in your usual procedure. The Royal Pharmaceutical Society has a great guide for dispensing medication you can find. If you need to call the young person's cared for person, in this case his mum, you could use that as an ask whether the young carer can be logged as such in the patient records, and to ask whether the young carer needs any advice on how to give the medication. You should include the young carer in any conversation like this so that they can understand what giving the medication entails and to ensure that they are comfortable being listed as the patient's carer. So, case 2. A young carer enters to fill a prescription. They don't have a Ycid and mention that they are new to caring. It's a weekday and you notice they might be missing school. So this scenario is an excellent option to signpost to support. You can ask the young carer if they would like to be included on the patient's records so that other pharmacists know that they are. You can explain what that means for them beforehand and let them make that decision themselves. You can also ask if they'll be helping the person they care for to take the medication, and if so, explain how to do that safely if they aren't already aware. You can also signpost them to their local authority or to us at carers.org, or if you're in Wales, that's carers.org/Wales. And you can let them know about the Young Carers ID card and encourage them to look into it themselves. If you're living in an area which is testing the young, at the moment that's Gwynedd local authorities in Wales, you could even let the young carer know about the Ping My School function, so that if they have to miss school again, the school can be aware. So case 3, a parent, a regular client of yours, phones the pharmacy to let you know their child will be collecting their prescription for them, as they're no longer able to pick it up themselves. The parent makes it clear that the young person will be picking up prescriptions for them from now on, but insists their child is not a carer and does not need carer support, services or advice in this regard. So this is quite a frequent issue that we see. Many carers and their families don't like the term carer, asking, are you looking after someone, is a different way of saying the same thing and can have very different results. If you know that the young carer is collecting medicines for a parent because they're not well enough to do so, they are legally entitled by the Social Services and Wellbeing Wales Act to be a carer. So you can record them as such and should treat them with the knowledge that they fulfill a caring role. Having promotional materials in your pharmacy, such as posters or leaflets that signpost, can be really helpful. And that way the young person might see information that resonates with them and makes them feel empowered to seek support elsewhere. It's also worth speaking with your local health board or your local authority, as they might have some locally relevant schemes that can provide you with resources like posters and other signposting materials. And you can always reach out up to us, again, at carers.org or carers.org/Wales to find promotional materials that can be relevant for your work. To ensure that they understand how to store and give medicine, if that's something they'll now be doing. So the most important thing to take away from this exercise is that each case, each interaction you have with a young carer can present its own unique challenges. We understand that you might have procedures and rules to follow, but wherever you can, as you know, it's important to be accommodating and personable. For some young carers, you might be a source of very valuable information to them, whether that's about medication or finding out how you can act. And we hope that the Young Carers ID card will encourage more conversations between professionals and young carers and make these conversations easier and more to the point. So in this session, we've covered the Young Carers ID card, what it looks like in a pharmacy context, how to support young carers if you're outside of Wales or don't yet have access to the ID card, how to have a positive and productive conversation with a young carer, and some example scenario challenges you might face when meeting a young carer in your place of work. If you'd like further support and advice around this topic, you can always reach out to Carers Trust. So for the Wales team, you can email wales@carers.org or call us on 0300 772 9702. You can also reach out to me directly. My email's on the screen, lspires@carers.org, for anything relating to the Young Carers ID card. If you're based anywhere else in the UK, you can email our head office at info@carers.org or call on 0300 772 9600. You can also search for local carer services near you to signpost to. At carers.org, we have a link at the top of the page called Local Carer Services, which will show you services near you according to your device's location. We also have a range of resources to carer aware, in particular a resource to support pharmacists in recognizing and using the Ycid I introduced to you earlier. You can and more at carers.org/YCID. This week is also Carers Week, and you can visit carersweek.org to find out more about the week and what's happening across the UK. Pledge your own action to support carers nationwide. I'd just like to say thank you so much for attending, and to the Royal College of Pharmacy for facilitating this session. If you've joined partway through or know someone who wanted to attend but couldn't, as you may already know, this session is being recorded and hopefully will be put online in due course. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Lily, and thanks for the fantastic presentation and all of the great resources that you and the team have put together. We've certainly found the pharmacy guide really helpful. Couple of really good points again today. So since we spoke last time, I've certainly used the question, are you looking after someone? And had some really good results by using that question and using the poster that's available on your website as well. But yeah, again, lots to learn from the session. So thank you very much. I think the key for me is the relationships, and that's why I see it as a massive opportunity for pharmacy teams, because we already have these relationships and so important that we ask these questions and really make a difference to people's lives. So thank you, Lily. We did have a few problems with the videos, and just to let everyone know that we will be sharing links to these on the platform that you came in through. So worth watching back, because they are very powerful videos, hearing from carers themselves. And we'll also be sharing a link to this session so people can watch back. And as Lily said, if you think this would be useful for colleagues or members of your team, please do use that link, and you can watch back the great session that Lily's put together here today. So last thing from me, Lily, is just to thank you for the session. Thank you for all your work. We're looking forward to working with you. And I suppose one last reminder, you did mention about it being different across different areas. So do look out for events in your area. So we know this Thursday, which is June the 10th, there's an event this evening that evening with Cardiff Health Boards, unveiling their young carers card, and there will be similar events across Wales. So please do look out for that as well. So thank you, Lily, and thank you everyone for joining us, and we hope you found it helpful.
Thanks, everyone.